Hello and welcome to my channel, I Went to Lose Gaming. After the 1.3 Geo buffs, all Geo characters are much more promising, and the Geo Traveler is no exception to this. In this guide, I'm going to go over artifacts, weapons, and more for our underrated MC. This guide will be for a burst support traveler, and by burst support I mostly mean like a sub DPS role where she swaps in, does a lot of damage, and then swaps out. You can build your traveler as a main DPS and utilize her sword attacks, but I believe it's much more efficient to run her as a burst damage support character instead of as a main DPS. Because you can cast her burst and her skill in quick succession, you'll switch in, use her burst or her elemental skill first, and then use the other one. With this playstyle, Traveler is not intended to stay on the field for long periods of time, but instead to swap in, provide a large burst of Geo damage, and then swap out. Before continuing, it's super important to note that the Geo Resonance does not work unless you have two Geo characters in your party and you have a shield on. The shield can be from anything, whether it's crystallized or from a shielder like Beidou, Diona, Noelle, Zhongli, and Xinyan. But out of all these, Zhongli and Noelle really stand out, particularly because they are also Geo, and they cover both the criteria of having a shield and a second Geo character. Here's a comparison of Traveler's damage without Geo Resonance, with 2 Geo but without a shield, and finally with 2 Geo and with Zhongli's shield. You can see that the damage difference is huge. Let's start off with her mechanics and DPS options. If you tap E, Traveler will throw a boulder at a set distance, and it will take quite a bit longer in comparison to if you hold E, then you go into zoomed in mode and immediately drop your E. This is faster than just tapping E. Now if an enemy destroys one of Traveler's boulders, the boulder then explodes and does a second instance of boulder damage. If used well, or with some good RNG, this can double your Traveler's skill damage. A quick way to do a lot of damage with Traveler is to first hold E and drop it, then use Q. And looking at this DPS chart, we can see that her best option is to swap in, hold E, and then Q. Let's do a quick analysis of why I recommend using Traveler for her Geo damage and not her physical sword damage. Her DPS on her skill and burst are extremely high in comparison to her charged attacks with her sword. On top of this, thanks to the massive Geo buffs in 1.3, Geo damage is going to just be way better than physical damage. Thanks to the 1.3 buffs, your Geo damage goes up by an average of 26% with the Geo Resonance and with the shield up, and 38% with Zhongli's shield up specifically. A quick thing to note is that after using Traveler's Burst, your entire team inside the AoE will gain 10% crit rate, but you do have to stay in the AoE. So this helps the Traveler as well as your other characters on your team by providing them an additional 10% crit rate. Next, let's quickly talk about Traveler's artifact choices. Here's a quick chart after I calculated her maximized damage with various artifact combinations with a level 90 Traveler with an R1 Jade Cutter and level 9 basic attack and level 12 elemental skill and burst. After a lot of artifact farming, you can reach about 60 to 80% of these damage numbers in this chart. For her Geo damage build, you have a few choices. One being the 2-piece Gladiators plus 2-piece Archaic Petra. This combination yields the highest damage to her skill. The next is 2-piece Noblesse Oblige plus 2-piece Archaic Petra. This yields the best damage for her burst. You can also run Geo Traveler as a burst support with the 4-piece Noblesse Oblige to also boost her party's damage by 20% after using her burst. If I had to recommend one of these over the others, I would go with the 2-piece Gladiators and 2-piece Archaic Petra. It's a very well-rounded set, and her skill damage goes up quite a bit with it. But overall, when it comes to picking artifacts for Geo Traveler, substats are the most important thing to consider because her set bonuses from each of these 2 pieces or even the 4-piece Noblesse Oblige provide a relatively small boost in power in comparison to ideal substats. As usual, for most damage characters, you will want an attack percent timepiece, a Geo damage goblet, and a crit circlet. For substats, you want to prioritize crit rate, crit damage, and attack percent. Now let's take a look at Geo Traveler's weapon choices. Again, these are maximized damage numbers, and after a lot of artifact farming, you can reach about 60 to 80% of these damage numbers. I've also added my personal rating for these between 0 and 5 stars for each of these weapon choices. A thing that really skyrocketed Geo Traveler in viability is the new 5-star sword, the Primordial Jade Cutter. His sword provides an incredible 44.1% crit rate and makes gearing her properly a much easier task. Now, the sword is not necessary for a Geo Traveler to be good, but it certainly does help, and it's the best in slot choice for Geo Traveler, at least for outputting as much Geo damage as possible. Other notable weapons are the Summit Shaper, but I personally don't like it because not only does it not have crit as a substat, which makes it a bit harder to build, you don't want to be building stacks on your Geo Traveler by smacking them with your sword. Generally speaking, you want to switch her in, do her thing, and swap her out. So staying on the field to use her sword attacks to gain stacks is oftentimes not pragmatic. As such, you start off most battles with no stacks on Geo Traveler with the Summit Shaper, but it's still a good weapon choice due to its great stats, and you can always build stacks with it by hitting things. The next weapon I want to talk about is the Aquila Favonia. This is still a great sword for her geo damage output due to its really high stats, and it has the added benefit of making her basic attack sting more. The Lion's Roar at Refinement 5 seems like an interesting choice if you run her with Beidou, because then you will have Electro on your enemies quite often, but personally it's not something I'm going to recommend because I haven't tried it, so I can't really attest to his performance. The Festering Desire is a good choice for her skill damage, and in my opinion it's one of the best free-to-play options for Traveler because a lot of you guys will have it at Refinement 5. Now, it does severely neuter her burst damage, so do keep that in mind. But you are also able to burst much more often thanks to its energy regeneration. Another great free-to-play option is the Harbinger of Dawn. Of course, you'll need to keep Geo Traveler's HP over 90% to reap the benefits from the sword, so it is best paired with a very sturdy shielder like Zhongli. But of course, if you find yourself able to keep your HP topped off, it's going to be a good choice. The Black Sword is notable as a great choice because it's a cheap battle pass option. The crit rate substat on it makes it easier to farm artifacts for your Traveler. Similar to the Aquila Favonia, it does boost your Traveler's basic attacks. Other notable weapons may include the Energy Recharge Swords, but I think they do neuter her damage a lot, but you will have higher burst uptime, which is nice. For prioritizing which skills to level, I actually recommend for you to see what you end up using more before deciding which ones to level beyond level 6. If you use her skill a lot more, level her skill more. If you use her burst a lot more, level her burst more. For me personally, I use them both a lot, so I'm leveling both of them equally, with a slight prioritization towards her burst. You can also base this decision based on your weapon choice. For example, if you're using the Festering Desire, you'll want to level her skill more than her burst, because that will make up a much larger portion of her damage output. As for your Traveler's normal sword attacks, I think they're pretty bad, but they also don't use the same material as the Traveler's skill and burst do when it comes to boss materials, so you can level it if you want. For teams, it's pretty much a necessity to run a second Geo character. Zhongli is, in my opinion, Traveler's best teammate by far. When they're both well built, the two of them provide so much quote-unquote sub-DPS that you usually don't even need a main DPS. They are an incredible sub-DPS core that will complement almost any main DPS in the game. Zhongli's shield also has the added benefit of having 150% all damage absorption, and it has 100% uptime, and it has 20% resistance shred, so it's by far the most broken shield in the game. While Zhongli is arguably Traveler's best teammate, Traveler is arguably Noelle's best teammate, especially a main DPS Noelle. Noelle has a pretty decent shield, and she also does quite a bit of damage herself, so Traveler can just swap in whenever to drop her skill, drop her burst maybe, and then swap out, providing Noelle with Geo energy as well as a lot of additional damage. If you run other Geo characters like Ningguang or Albedo, I would strongly recommend having a non-Geo shielder like Beidou, for example. She stands out to me in this situation. And also, Beidou will help apply Electro, so that way you can crystallize and provide additional shields to maintain the Geo Resonance for Geo Traveler. For the other 1 to 2 slots, I suggest running a main DPS, or even additional supports, depending on your team formation. And you can always run 3 or even 4 Geo characters if you wanted. The next question I'll try to help you answer is, should you build Traveler? One big thing about Traveler, and honestly any Geo character, is the Geo Resonance buff. To illustrate the importance of having a second Geo character, let's take a look at this chart again. After toggling on yes for Geo Resonance, the damage goes up by an average of 26%. And it's honestly one of the main reasons that Geo Traveler is pretty good now. So Knowing this, if you have Zhongli, you should strongly consider a second Geo character to level up, and Traveler is a pretty good choice for the sub DPS role. However, if you need a main DPS Geo role to pair with Zhongli, Noelle and Ningguang are probably better than Traveler for that purpose. Now if you don't have Zhongli, Traveler is still a good sub DPS for Noelle or Ningguang. With Ningguang though, you have to rely on Crystallize like I mentioned, or another shielder like Beidou. Another thing to consider for if you should build Traveler is, do you have a good sword for her? If you have the Jade Cutter, then you have the probably best in slot weapon for Geo Traveler. If you have an R5 Festering Desire, Geo Traveler can also make good use of that. So really, if you have the Jade Cutter and Zhongli, I feel like it's almost a no-brainer to invest into Geo Traveler. Now if you have a main DPS Noelle, Geo Traveler is one of the best batteries and sub DPS options for her. Now if you don't have Zhongli or a main DPS Noelle, you may want to think twice about building Geo Traveler, because in my opinion it really is the Geo Resonance that pushes Geo Traveler over the edge. But Geo Traveler with Festering Desire is also able to basically 9-star Abyss 12 with Zhongli as a shield support. In these runs, Geo Traveler is essentially the sole source of damage throughout Abyss 12-1, 12-2, and 12-3. Now you won't get this level of performance without Zhongli or without good artifacts, so do keep that in mind. But considering Traveler is meant to be a sub DPS, and despite using her as a main DPS here, I believe this illustrates the point that her sub DPS output is extremely potent, and considering the fact that I'm using the free-to-play Festering Desire. So there you go, I hope you found this guide on Geo Traveler useful and interesting. She has been one of the main characters that I use nowadays, and if you know me, I'm a pretty big whale with some pretty decked out characters, so for Geo Traveler to even have a spot on my teams is a testament to how powerful she is. As always, thanks for watching. This is I Win to Lose, signing out.